model, we want to make sure that we understand what we're going to model. The idea of a reference image, I may have referred to it in the past, is that you don't want to just go in and necessarily build Mickey Mouse without looking at pictures of Mickey Mouse, because you're not going to have the authentic proportions. Even though everyone would recognize Mickey Mouse when he's done properly, it's hard to remember. Same thing's true of DoodleBob. So when we look at some images of DoodleBob, and we see what the start to see what the proportions are, we can bring in an image like this and use it right in our 3ds Max scene. So I'm going to start with a brand new scene, and I hope you have as well. Just going to start with a new scene. I don't need my material editor open, and you're probably used to seeing the quad viewports, and you're probably used to seeing it with the grid kind of like this. And so before I even start to build too much, I just want to talk about how DoodleBob lays out as far as proportions. So what I've done is I've gone into Photoshop and I've set up an image. What I did is I dropped DoodleBob on a background that has graph paper, so I could kind of keep track of like how many squares wide should DoodleBob be, how many squares tall should he be. And as I counted those up, I kind of took some notes to myself, and I realized he should be about 5 units wide and about 6 units tall. And so when I built this image right here, and I actually copied it out and saved it, it's on the network drive for your access. There's a folder out here under Art in 3D, which has got these reference images for you. So I'm going to grab this one from here. I'm going to put it in the right spot. So Game Programming, under Art, 3D, there's something called DoodleBob. So in the DoodleBob area, I will paste this reference image that I built. The DoodleBob pelt I created by basically taking an image from the internet, and I built it square, so it's like 1024 by 1024. And I copied and pasted his face on one part, and then once I had his face, I just deleted the extra elements. Now, you could get into here and you could actually add some extra dots to indicate that he looks more spongy. That's fine. You can do that kind of work in Paint. It's not a big deal. So if we wanted to have more of a feel of some dots, we could do so. I'm not going to grade you on the quality of your art by any measure, but I'm just trying to modify this a little bit so you can see that this is third session's work that we're doing. In fact, maybe we should have him have something cool on the back that says something like third session rules. So that, when people see this DoodleBob, they know that this is the best session of all, right? You guys okay with that? Okay. This color is the one that should be red. There we go. Third session rules. All right. So now they got that. I'm going to save this version. I'm going to save it up on the DoodleBob area, which is under Art and 3D. And there's a DoodleBob folder. Not too complicated. DoodleBob pelt. I'll add a 3 at the end for third session and save that. So now I can use this as a reference image as well as the material that I'm going to put into my on my DoodleBob character. So back in 3ds Max, I've got my work planned out. I kind of know the proportions. They're in this PowerPoint that I went through as well, and this has been saved out there, so you'll be able to open this up. We're going to create a plane now and use the pelt material for a reference image. So we're going to go to the Create panel in 3ds Max, and we're actually going to create a box. And you can kind of eyeball the proportions, but what we want to consider is these segments, how many we have on each side. All right, so on the Create panel, I'm looking for box, which I find, and I'm just going to start to set up a DoodleBob character here. And I have to think about how many I've got up and down and left to right. By default, these are probably 1, 1, and 1. So you're probably looking at 1, 1, and 1. And you might not see any edge faces unless you've changed this to show edged faces. That's going to be very helpful. I would highly suggest you turn on edged faces so you can see where your subdivisions are. So that's going to be a DoodleBob character that we're going to model from here. But we want that reference image. We're going to put that on a plane, not an aeroplane, but a plane as in a flat object. So since I know it's square and I know the grid is square, I'm just going to trace the outline of the square here and let go of it. This image here, I can, this geography here, geometry, I can put an image there very easily just by dragging it. So from our DoodleBob folder, we can literally drag this third session image onto it, and it will show up right on this reference plane. Don't have to build a material or anything. Now to make this usable, I'm going to want to rotate it. I'm going to use the rotate object. And as I kind of pay attention here, I can see I'm going for 90 here. I went a little bit too far. So I'm going to overtype this to 90. And I'm going to look from the side here. I can see that I've got my DoodleBob face. I'm going to switch to my Move tool. And I'm going to start to line up my box and that artwork just to kind of see how they align. In fact, since I'm mostly working in this viewport here, what I'm going to do is maximize this viewport so it's a little easier for everyone to see. And if I move my artwork forward and back, I can kind of see how they compare. They're pretty close. So now I got a reference image in here and I've got a box. I want to make sure my box is a little bit closer in size. I haven't done anything else with it yet, so what I can do is I can just proportion it the way I want by clicking on these vertices, and I can just change them one way or the other, or use the Move tool to kind of line them up so that I've got my box and my artwork that are really close to the same size, just to make it easier on myself. So I've got a reference plane in the scene. If I look at my Scene Explorer back here, I've got two objects. I've got the box I'm creating, and I've got this reference plane. So the reference plane has got my artwork on it. Want me to stop for a minute while you guys catch up? Yeah, check with your pod because I can't really get up from the demo and help everybody out. But what we're looking for is a scene. You know what? Let me do this. I'm going to do File. I'm going to save a copy of this as, and I'm going to go to the Game Programming drive under Art, 3D, DoodleBob, and I'm just going to call it Setup for DoodleBob. And so if you want to, you could actually open that file and save a copy on your own. So you'd end up with this particular file all set for you. You just the question is, how do I get the texture on my plane? What you're going to want to do is open up a File Explorer, and you're going to go to the folder where you've got this object. It's the pelt. In fact, I'll grab the other one that doesn't say third session rules. We just drag the image file right to our object. It takes a minute for it to process, and then we should see it show up. Okay, so the one that does have the third session, I'm going to grab this one and drag it out here. There it is. I'm going to go back to, so now I've got my plane and I've got my box. I'm going to turn the plane off temporarily just to kind of show you the box is still there. But right now I only have a 1x1. If you've created a box and you want to actually add some extra details to it, that can be done by going to the Modify panel. This is where you can do things like change the color and change the name. You can also change the number of segments. So because the lines are going to be white, I'm going to pick a darker color, just so it shows up a little bit better to show my edged faces. And instead of calling it box 001, I'm going to call it DoodleBob head and body. Just whatever name makes sense to you so it's not called box 001. I'm going to take a look again at this image that I was talking about and understand I want 5 wide and 6 high. And there's a reason why. I looked at that on a graph paper. So 5 wide, 6 high. So I'm going to jump back into 3ds Max here. And I'm going to make sure that my height is 5. I'm sorry. I think that's only supposed to be 5 high. No, 6? Okay, good. Thank you. And 5 for the width, right? So I should be seeing my lines here. There they are. So if I click on this, I can see my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got this set up with the right proportions. So when I go to put my artwork in here, I can kind of keep track that my arms are going to come out from a certain point and my legs are going to come out from the other. So where we're at in the process now is we've got a box that's proportioned, and I'm not worried about your exact size, but the proportions are the key. Same with a recipe. So we've got our texture pelt. We created a plane. We created the box. The next step is to add a modifier called Edit Poly. So we've gone through this step right here. We're going to add Edit Poly to it. To add a modifier, we can click where it says Modifier List, and we're going to touch E to get to Edit, and go down to Edit Poly. So far, none of this is different from what we did with our turning a box into a jet. We've added an Edit Poly modifier to it. And when we have an Edit Poly modifier, we can actually get inside and come down to the polygon level. And now we have to think about where the arms are going to come out of our body. And if we look at DoodleBob and we think about where the arms are, let's see here. The way I found it and this is why the reference image is good, the arms come from 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes down. Okay, so 3.5 is going to be hard to find on the way we set this up, but I'm going to just approximate about 4 units down. So 4 units down, I'm going to come down. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and so this on the side here is what's going to become his arm. Now, just like we did with our jet plane, how can we actually make this geometry change so that it extends out like an arm? There's a number of ways we could do it. Any ideas? There is something called extrude, and there's something called bevel. Now, I'm going to use extrude first, and now there's at least 3 different ways to get to extrude. One of them is over here. It's clicking on the word extrude. And if I do that, it brings up extrude, and then I can click to extrude the length out. That's one way to do it. I'm going to hit escape to stop doing that. Actually, Control Z to undo it. The other one is to click next to the word extrude. It brings up what we call the dolly. Kind of looks like a Monopoly card. And this, I think, is preferable because what you can do is you can actually change the value. And if you say, all right, I'm going to have it come out about that far, and then you can actually say I'm all done, or you could say forget about it. I'm going to scroll back a little bit. And as I bring the dolly up this time, I'm going to show you the benefit of this plus key that's here as well. If I click on plus, I can add another one or a third one. Now, I didn't set these up so that they're the same as 1 unit. So I'm going to cancel out, and what I want to do is I want to I'm going to undo back to where I was. I'm going to try to pull out to a point where it's about the same as one of these segments, because again, it's all about the proportions, right? The other option would be bevel. Bevel has the advantage is you can actually go out a distance, but you can also make it get skinnier as well. So because DoodleBob's arms are really, really skinny, I can actually set it up so it comes down to a pretty fine point pretty quickly. And then with that same point highlighted there, I can then extrude out so that I'm making a much smaller piece extrude out, because I want DoodleBob's arm to be significantly smaller than the rest of his body. And I'm just going to have this come out. His arms are crazy long. If I look back at the reference image here, I can see this arm when it's behind him is only 2 units long, but this one that's more even with his body is probably more like 5 units long. So DoodleBob has to be able to get his hands above his head to hold the pencil. So it's got to be at least 1, 2, 3, 4 or more units long. And he's only 5 units wide, so his arms are almost as long as his body is wide. So he starts looking a little bit funky because this arm is going to end up being pretty long. So I've got a couple of units here. Now, I'm free modeling, right? I'm not giving you specific examples other than telling you, all right, you can use bevel and you can use extrude. It would probably be appropriate for me to grab a print screen or a snipping tool of this real quick just to kind of capture what I'm doing, and I'll throw that into the PowerPoint for you. So that's been a combination of a bevel and an extrude operation to get his arm in place. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to throw that into right about here. Give you guys an example of what that looks like. So there's one arm. Now, do you remember when we start working with a model, if we want to have the same thing show up on the other side, an easier way to do it? Absolutely. So if I come up to my Edit Poly at the top level and I add a Symmetry modifier. So I'm going to select Symmetry, and I got lucky. This one's lined up exactly right, left to right. If you don't have it set up on the proper axis, you might need to change it to Y or Z, but X works for me, the way I've got mine set up in my world. So now even though I only modeled one arm, it automatically is doing with the Symmetry modifier, it's giving me the other arm. Okay, the next step I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at the bottom because I got to figure out where to put my leg. Now I'm temporarily going to turn Symmetry off so I can keep track of my proportions, because DoodleBob's kind of weird. He's kind of got two boxes of space in between them, and he's got, I'm going to get back to the Edit Poly and come down to the polygon level so I know what I'm working with here. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to have his leg come out of one of these points right here. So do I want to extrude this right away, or do I want to use something else? Remember, they're little legs, so we're going to use a bevel modifier. And when I bring up the dolly here, I can check my work from a couple different angles. It kind of remembers the settings, and I can say, okay, that's good. And then with that same polygon highlighted, I'm going to add an extrude. I'm going to bring up the dolly, and there it is. Now his legs are not nearly as long as his arms are. But I do believe DoodleBob has feet. So let's take a look at this. We're going to look at DoodleBob, and I don't know if you can see, but his feet kind of come out at a little angle there. He's got a little bit of a foot. His leg is only about 1.5 units long. So it's not nearly as long as his arms, short legs, and even shorter feet. So now I've got the start of a leg here in 3ds Max, but what I want to do is show you how to add a little smaller segment to add a foot here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on plus, but before I do the checkbox, I'm going to shorten this a lot. I'm going to make it so much shorter that it actually is just going to be basically like an ankle. So what I've done is, and I'll zoom in on my selection to show you a little bit better. Maybe zoom back a little bit. I've got at the bottom of his leg just enough to start his foot. So what I'm going to do now is click on a different polygon, the one in front, and I want to make this stick out in front so it becomes his foot. I could bevel if I wanted to. And this bevel actually is in the wrong order. It's going a negative value versus a positive value. So I could bevel it out to a nice little point like this. Make it come out a little further. That could be a nice little foot right there. I'm pretty happy with that. I could have done an extrude as well. So if I cancel this and I just do an extrude, it's just going to be a flat space. It's not going to bevel out at all, and that's fine as well. That's probably truer to what DoodleBob is. It's just this stubby little foot off the end. And if I scroll back to check my proportions, I'm not going to grade you on the quality of your art. I'm looking to give you practice at creating a character. And so he's got one leg coming out the bottom. He's got one arm coming out the side. I know it looks a little awkward at this point, but I think that's good. Because what I'm going to do now is turn Symmetry back on. And when I do so, I should end up seeing both legs show up as well as both arms. So with the Move and Select tool, I want to make sure I turn Symmetry back on, and I can see I've got DoodleBob with two long arms and two relatively short legs. Now I'm pretty much have had this reference plane around just if I needed it. That kind of gives you an idea how he lines up there. Now he is still a polygon, and let's go back to our instruction set, which I'm leaving for you. So I'm going to actually insert a new slide here as well. and put the instructions, add the leg, combo, bevel, and extrude. And I'll give you guys a sample screenshot of what that looks like. So I'm going to grab a new one here. And you can see we've got our Symmetry modifier on there as well. That's what's being highlighted. I'm going to copy that and throw that into our instructions for reference for later. Okay, back in our instructions here, just to make sure I'm keeping myself honest to the place. We've done the plane, we did the box, we added poly, we did the symmetry, we modeled the extremities. Now we want to do a save as. The reason we're doing a save as is we're about to change this from the ability to be able to drill down to that point that we can get to these box parameters to something that we can't. So at this point, click on File and do a Save As. Save it on your H drive where you can get to it, and give it a name like DoodleBob modeled as polygons. And we can get back to this point as a recovery if we need to, but what I'm about to do, I can't really undo. And so this is one of those rare times when you want to save before you actually do the next thing. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to right-click on this guy, and I'm going to say Convert to Editable Mesh. Now, just for clarity, I'm going to get rid of this background reference plane so that when I do this, Convert to, let's see here, move and select, grab my object, right-click, Convert to Editable Mesh. I'm going to grab that as a screen I can edit. And when I do that, you'll notice the modifier stack no longer shows anything that led up to its being built. There is no longer a symmetry modifier. There is no longer an edit poly modifier. It's a mesh, which means it's just the outside, and we've lost track of all the things that we did to get to this point. But that's what we're going to do, is we're going to create a skeletal or a static mesh to go into the game engine. And we're only concerned with the exterior. If the outside looks nice, we're not worried about what it took to make the middle form that shape. So I did do a print screen. I want to make sure before I lose track of it that I jump into Paint for a second. And I paste the image that I grabbed and scroll back so I can crop down to just the part you guys need. I'm going to select this part here, and I'll crop it, grab it with a copy, and I'll throw this image into the PowerPoint for you. So now we've got our guy modeled, and what we're going to do, we've saved it, and then we've created a editable mesh. Now, at this point, you can go simple or complex. If I really wanted to be super duper careful with this, I can get rid of some extra vertices. I could actually eliminate some of these things so that it gets more simple. I guess it's an oxymoron. Simpler geometry, but more complex for us to get it done. I'm going to stick with this the way it is. I've got a mesh, and now I want to put a material on it. And this is just like what you did with the airplane. So can anyone remind me, how do I put a material on an object in 3ds Max? I'm going to touch M on the keyboard, or I could come up here where it shows the material editor that looks like, let's see which one it is, right here. This is the material editor button, like checkerboards being combined as nodes. And I've already got one built here, so I'm just going to delete this so that we don't get confused with it. But building a standard material with a bitmap, it's pretty simple. I've got a node here called standard. I double click on it. I've got a node here called bitmap. I'm going to double click on it. And it says bitmap. What bitmap? So let's go to the game programming drive. Under Art and then 3D. Having trouble selecting it. And under 3D, we built this new folder called DoodleBob. And there's our pelt for session 3. So we're going to open that. They're stacked on top of each other, which is not pretty, so I'll lay it out over here. This is going to be part of my diffuse color. This should be exactly what we did when we worked with our airplane. And if I highlight this node here, I can, I guess people kind of go left to right. So we'll click from this exit node, and we'll drop it on DoodleBob. The next thing you want to make sure is you've got this icon here, Show Shaded Material in Viewport. And then I've got the start of my material has been applied to my geometry. So this object is showing in the viewport. If I scroll down here, you'd see it actually shows as a scene material. And I'm surprised it doesn't have a little red hash mark indicating that it's being shown in the viewport. So this is another good opportunity to kind of grab a screen and show that what we've done here is we've applied the material to our DoodleBob. The only thing we have, I guess I should clarify that we're still dealing with an editable mesh only. We have not added anything else to it. It's just an editable mesh. So let me grab that screenshot again, because in this instance, we have to do another bit of modification, just like we did on the plane, to properly map this UV texture onto our geometry. A little louder, I can't quite hear you. That's fine, yeah. Make sure you click on Show Shaded Material in Viewport. Okay? That's one thing that you might be missing there. Cool. So once you get it Show Shaded Material in Viewport, it should actually not be gray anymore. It should start to show you some type of a preview like this. Does anybody remember what the name of the modifier is that we put on the airplane so that we could control what shows up where? Perfect. It's the unwrap. So remember now, this is the editable mesh, which, before I forget about it, I'm going to do another save as to make sure that I actually have got, this one's not as polygons. This one's going to be DoodleBob modeled as a mesh. And this one's with texture, just so I can keep track of what I'm doing. And now I'm about to add this unwrap UVW, which should look familiar. So I've got my unwrap UVW on the editable mesh, and we've worked with this before following a tutorial. I have a slightly different workflow I'd like to show you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the polygon level here, and I want to select everything on his face here. So I'm going to lock myself on the front viewport by touching F. Okay, I want to make sure I'm on the front viewport, and I'm grabbing polygons. I'm going to hold the control key, and I'm going to click and drag over the whole front and just the front. So you could have done this with the airplane as well, where you highlight a part you're interested in. Then I'm going to click on this thing that says Open UV Editor. Now, because this is a very boxy object, I have a new option available to me that isn't really appropriate for our jet. Well, the first thing is we're looking at a checkerboard here. That's not too helpful. Upper right-hand corner here, I can click on the name of my texture, and I'll see that. And the next thing I want to do is something that they didn't have you do in the tutorial. I'm going to click on the word mapping, and I'm going to select Flatten Mapping. It's going to look for anything that's at a 45 degree or more, and it's going to separate them out into bits and pieces. So now that I've done that, I've flattened my mapping. I didn't need to be full screen to do that. I just did that for the purpose of making it easier for you to see what was going on. I'm editing my UVs here. I made this a little bit too big. There we go. You'll notice that the red rectangle is indicating what is being mapped onto my geometry. The two buttons that I like to use a lot are down at the bottom here. They are Lock My Selection and Hide Everything Else. So I'm only dealing with this part of my model. And then I want to make sure I'm in this mode here that says freeform mode. And from there, I can do things like scaling and moving and line up the face so that I've got my geometry lined up with my artwork. That's the front. And since I'm done with the front, I'm going to turn off the lock and turn off the display only selected faces. And in my scene, I want to rotate around to look at the other side. So this is the front. What I want to do then is go over to the back. I'm going to use the steering wheel in the corner here to get to the back. So I'm on the back. If I'm not sure I'm on the back, I can double check the viewport name in the upper left hand corner here. We're going to do exactly the same thing, where we're going to click on the polygons on the back by holding the control key and selecting the polygons on the back. Now that I've got the back, I'm going to make sure I lock my selection, which is this lock. Change the view so I'm not looking at everything. And I can make sure I'm in freeform mode. I can scale this down and use the move tool. And this is kind of an interesting thing I noticed in the earlier session, is because of the symmetry modifier, we're ending up with two versions of this, one over the other. Again, I'm going to go to mapping and say flatten mapping, say OK, and you'll notice that all of a sudden we've got this flattened out so that when we line this up, it'll look much better. So freeform mode, scaling. Make sure you actually get the scaling here. Oh yeah, make sure I unlock, relock, freeform mode, scaling, move. So it's if you've got your fingers floating over the W, E, and R key, you get pretty quick at like going between rotate, scale, etc. So I've got the front and the back. Everything else, it's a matter of how perfect you want this to make. So if I turn off the lock and this one and I go back, I don't know if all of the other body parts are going to be lined up with black or not. There's some anomalies, but those are easy to fix. If we want to come in here and make sure the sides are all black, that's very easy to do. On the polygon level, we're just going to start doing control click on all of the faces that we want to actually deal with. So if these don't have black and you want them to have black, just click on them and select them. Anything that's not black now is what I'm going for. But I don't want to click on anything that does have a texture on it. Don't want to select those things because those have got something special on them already. Nobody's hopefully going to be staring too much at the bottom part of DoodleBob, but if he's flying through the air, you never know. Make sure you don't click on the parts that you have another texture, though. For the purposes of this demo, I'm going to, this is being recorded for you, I'm just going to grab a part of them, jump back into this Open UV editor, and again, remind you that you want to lock your selection and change the visibility to only the ones. Make sure you're in freeform mode. Scale it and rotate it, but basically if it's going to be black, you can scale it down and move it almost anywhere. If it's black, that's good enough and you can move on to the next part. It's so much faster when all you're doing is black on black. So now we're back into this view. Again, polygon level, control click on whatever you want to change. Just making sure I didn't ruin his face. Back in the UV editor, lock our selection, hide everything else, and if you can just move it to a different area. If it's black, black works. Don't worry about it and move on. Turn that back to where it belongs. Grab another part that needs to be turned black. So this is kind of rinse, repeat. Once you get this process down, you get pretty quick at it. You'd be surprised how quickly you get in here. Make sure you're in your locked, hidden. Move everything to the black area. It doesn't matter that the UVs are overlapping at all. In fact, it adds efficiency to it. So if I did it from the bottom, and I made sure I had this so that it was surrounding, I should be able to grab just the bottom, I hope. Make sure I didn't grab the sides. I ended up grabbing the sides. I don't want the sides because that's going to ruin the back. This is where it gets to a point where it gets a little bit specific. I'm just going to grab the edges here maybe, as long as I didn't grab the back and front. I'm going to make this probably my last section. I'm going to leave his legs a little bit of white on there just because we're not building an actual video game. We're just practicing our process here. In the UV editor, hide and lock, I can just move these to the side. The other thing I can do is rotate it, because it doesn't matter to the computer. All you're doing is saying, on this part of the model, show me these colors. It's out of the way. You don't have to worry about it. So that's DoodleBob about ready to get rigged. Any questions on that so far? All right, so I'm going to save him again. I'm going to do File, Save As, and he's going to be with texture wrapped. I'm going to click on Save. And let's check our instructions. Where did we leave off here? All right, so I've saved the scene. I've gotten rid of the reference plane, and this is an interesting thing. Use the Move tool and put your character at 0, 0, 0. If you're going to take DoodleBob and put him in, or any character, and put him somewhere else, make sure your object, this actual editable mesh, make sure that you've got that object at a position in the world that's at 0, 0, 0. He's not at this point, so I want to make sure I put him at 0, 0, 0. And that puts him right in the center of the grid. If I look back at the grid here from a perspective viewport, I would see DoodleBob is right in my grid. He's basically right here in the middle of the world. There's DoodleBob. He's ready to go. So in order to bring DoodleBob in and animate him, now if you're modeling right now, take a minute and watch what I'm about to do, because this is the next step. This is something I haven't done with you before. Is we're actually going to export. So we're going to use export, and there's a few settings I want to make sure that you understand are necessary. So in 3ds Max, I'm going to export my scene. File, Export. And by default, it's going to actually know we want to use an FBX format. So what I'm going to do here is I want to make sure I'm in the proper folder where I can get to it, under Art and then 3D. So, sorry, game programming first. Under Art, and then 3D, and there's a folder here called DoodleBob. That's where I'm going to put it. I'm going to give him a name like DoodleBob from 3rd session. Now, here's where you need to pay attention to a couple of options. At the top, you want to make sure you select the option to triangulate. Now, it's not necessary with the Unreal Engine because it'll triangulate for you, but there are some engines that do better when your non-triangular geometry is triangulated. So we'll turn a square into 2 triangles, that kind of thing. The next important thing is to make sure you embed media. That means the texture files will go and you won't end up with a grayscale version of your character. And the third thing is, under FBX file format for our purposes, make sure you're using the 2013 version. There is a newer versions, but you'll see in a minute why that's important. And when I click on OK here, it basically has created a FBX format version of DoodleBob. Now comes the fun part. We're going to use a website to actually add animations to the character that we created. So let's go to a Google Chrome window. And what we're going to do here is it's by a company called Adobe. Anybody ever used anything from Adobe before? Sure, Photoshop, etc. And it's their animation site. So I know what it's called, but I want to show you. If you don't remember what it's called, you look for the Adobe animation site, and you click on this thing called Mixamo. If you need to log in, what you're going to want to use is the option to log in using your Google ID, and it'll automatically authenticate that you're here at Tech Campus and you can actually use this product. Now, just to show you, this is another earlier DoodleBob. If I looked at this guy's back, by the way, I could show you that this does not have the third session rules on the back. I'm going to upload a different character just to show you if you did not include the texture and we're going to try to upload it without the texture, you could end up with a weird version. So under Art and then 3D, I can grab an FBX file. Oh, actually, it's under Art, not 3D. Art. There you go, FBX models. And I'll grab Patrick here as an object file. So this Patrick version, I did not include the textures. And so without the textures, he shows up as grayscale. And what you're going to need to do is make sure that you have somewhere on the body you can specify as the chin, the wrists. This is why I picked a biped, which basically means a two-legged character, because I know that this will support it. This is why I built it symmetrical. By the way, this can't be off the model. It's got to be on the model. And then if everything's okay with the T pose, then we can actually auto-rig a character that we've built in our modeling software. And we can work with it further by letting Mixamo rig it and give us our animations. And this can go right into the game engine. So when you build an Unreal game, if you want to play as Patrick or as DoodleBob, which you've seen, this is how it's done. So here's a Patrick version that was modeled that's ready to go into a game with just a little bit more work. Pardon me. All right, so instead of doing this one, I'm going to go back, now that I've shown you how to do Patrick, and I'm going to grab the file that we actually modeled in this session. It's on Game Programming under Art, 3D, in the DoodleBob folder. And it is an FBX file called DoodleBob from third session. And when I open that, you'll notice it might not be oriented properly when it first comes up. It might be looking at his side. Oh, this one looks fine. You actually see his arms, etc. So I'm going to click on Next. And now this is the hardest thing you got to do all day, really, is figure out where you want to put DoodleBob's bits and pieces so that they're on the model and how his arms are going to act, where his wrists are, where his knees are. There's our third session rules being just so guys, if you get to the Mixamo thing, log on using Google. Okay? If you click on log on using Google, it's going to be much easier for you. All right, so there's DoodleBob from third session that we just modeled. He's been uploaded into Mixamo. When I click on Next here, I can actually verify that's what I want to work with. And I could do something like a skinning test, which is a pre-built one. Some of these animations are just a simple animation, like there's a boxing one. Some of them have multiple ones. So if you look at hip-hop dancing, for example, here's DoodleBob hip-hop dancing. It is beautiful and scary. So we really were reusing everything we've talked about before. We started out with a primitive. We did a modifier of edit poly, and we used a symmetry modifier to make sure it was even side to side. We did some UV wrapping, couple of different things we added to it, and so now we can actually find, for example, there's 52 pages of animations, and some of them have got multiple animations in it. For example, here's the let's try the Pro Sword and Shield Attack Pack. This is going to go through 51 different animations with this character. And I don't have to do a thing. I can just sit back and let this happen. So I'm going to have it unfollow. So that's going to go through all 51 animations with this character. This might not be ideal, of course, for our use, but I just want to demonstrate quick box model, quick texture, and with our speed run we can try different animations. I have been saving this version out there so that if you found like, it was giving you a hard time, there's multiple versions out there. So I'm going to do a save as well and save this as completed because this one's ready to go. This demo has been recorded in its entirety. And so what I'd like to see to demonstrate you got the work done is I'd like to see, now hopefully you understand you could put your name on the back. It doesn't have to say third session rules. And if you would show me some type of a snipping tool showing that you got your version up on the Mixamo site, there is an assignment out there where you could attach it. So you could just do a snipping tool to show. And this also could be your logo on DoodleBob if you wanted to. It does need to be a biped. So no dogs or octopuses or crabs or anything like that. Something that's got 2 arms and 2 legs. Hope you found this to be an interesting combination of some of the other things we've done in the past and an application that kind of shows you you don't have to do all of the animations. If you set something up right, you can actually have somebody else help you out with your animations.